Ready? Okay. Morning all. Welcome to my Classic to Lightning migration talk, or how I learned to stop worrying and love the Lightning experience. My name is Anup Jadhav. I'm a Salesforce technical architect. I've been working with Salesforce and related cloud technologies since 2008, and as an architect for the last few years. I've worked on a variety of projects, small, medium, large, ranging from medium to high complexity. I'm also the co-organizer of the London Developer User Group Meetup. We've been around for 7 years, and we have around 2,000 members. I believe we are the third largest Salesforce developer user group in the world. We meet every third Wednesday of the month, so if you'd like to join us, you can find us on meetup.com. I also have 10 Salesforce certifications, including some architect certs. I'm 2 times Salesforce MVP. That's my LinkedIn URL if you want to connect with me, and you can follow me on Twitter. I'm @Anup. Right, so unless you've been living under a rock for the last 3 years, you've heard of or seen Lightning Experience in action. It's the new UI that will eventually replace the current Aloha UI, also called the Classic UI. Now, you might be thinking, why should I bother moving from Lightning? You've probably spent months or years curating and maintaining your Lightning org, and it works perfectly. It satisfies all of your business requirements. So why do you introduce chaos into your life by moving from something that works perfectly fine to a different UI? Here are some reasons why you might consider migration. In Salesforce's own words, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's the CRM we would have built back in 1999 if we had the technology that we have today existed back then. Lightning offers over 50 new Sales Cloud pages and around 150 new features like Kanban on Opportunity and Others objects, Opportunity Workspace, Assistant, Einstein. Every customization that you make on Lightning is immediately available on any mobile device that supports Salesforce One app. Reports and dashboards got a huge upgrade. They have a new design and enhanced functionality. With dashboards especially, it has a new engine and new UI where you can add more than 3 columns, and it'll instantly refresh. With the launch of Einstein, Salesforce wants to bring the power of machine learning and deep learning to CRM, and Einstein is baked right into the Lightning platform. Even though Salesforce will continue to support Classic for a while, their product team is shifting its focus, its resources and efforts onto building new features for Lightning only, so you want to be ready for that kind of feature. So the next thing you might be wondering is, how do I do this? So there are 3 phases involved in moving to Lightning. There's the discover phase, where you and the business learn about Lightning Experience. You evaluate the impact of Lightning Experience and the feasibility of the migration. And finally, you align your organization goals wherein you fit in the migration into your overall CRM roadmap. Once you have an agreed strategy, you go into detailed planning as part of rollout phase. You do the actual build and then launch it to the users. Once you've launched to the users, you want to measure the effectiveness of the new UI on users' productivity, and also other metrics that you might have. So the next phase is optimize. The rest of the talk will cover each of these phases in detail. So let's start with discover. So I think my view is that discover is probably the most important phase out of the 3 that I mentioned. You start by learning. If you don't understand how Lightning works or what Lightning has to offer, then you won't be able to do gap analysis effectively. We'll talk about gap analysis in a bit. But most importantly, you won't be able to articulate the value proposition of Lightning to your stakeholders. Luckily, there are several resources that you can use to start learning Lightning today. Obviously, the first one is Trailhead. I hope everybody here knows what Trailhead is. I've added here are a few modules as a starter for 10. I would recommend this Trail, Make the Move to Lightning Experience. It's great for beginners and intermediate admins and devs. You can also find more in-depth information on the help and training website. If you want to dig deep into a particular aspect of Lightning feature, you can find that information here. And finally, I would highly recommend that you join the Lightning Now Success community. It's a community. It's a very active and engaging community of users, admins, devs, architects who are either going through the process of migrating to Lightning or have migrated to Lightning. You can join them to ask specific questions and get support. Okay, so now you've earned a few badges. You've read the documentation. You're now a Lightning expert. So the next step in Discover is to evaluate the feasibility of the migration and the impact it'll have on your development process and as well as on your users. You start by identifying some key stakeholders within your business. So these are the stakeholders who are invested into the CRM roadmap in Salesforce. Once you've identified the key stakeholders, you should then form a steering committee. Now, some of you might have a form of this steering committee. You might call it Center of Excellence or something else. But if you don't have it, even for a small migration project, it's useful to form a steering committee that has a diverse representation from all departments that are affected. You need to, this is obvious, but you need to engage all of the key stakeholders from the beginning, sharing everything that you've learned from the from the learning phase. The committee should ideally be held by an exec sponsor, ideally a C-level exec sponsor, and the primary purpose of this committee is to ensure the success of the migration. You should, in parallel, also start doing gap analysis. This is where you will find out what you need to do to prepare your org for the migration. And you might also find out that you are probably not ready for the migration because there are a few critical business functionalities that's not available on Lightning, and in that case, you might want to check out the Lightning Experience Roadmap, which is available in Help and Training, and plan your migration accordingly. You don't have to do this analysis manually. There's a great tool called the Lightning Experience Migration Assistant. Lightning Experience Migration Assistant. You can find it under Setup. It's a great tool. It analyzes your org. Looks at all of the config and customization that you've made and creates a PDF readiness report. This readiness report contains advice and recommendation on the things that you should do to prepare your org for migration. There's also another tool called the Lightning Experience Visualforce Check, which will look at all of your Visualforce pages, analyze it thoroughly, and then give you advice on how to, what changes to make to the Visualforce pages so that you can, so that they'll work in Lightning Experience UI. Again, these tools are not perfect. They're not as comprehensive as I'd like, so you should complement them with manual analysis. There's if you do one of the Trailhead modules, or you can Google this, there's a Lightning Experience Enablement Pack that's available. That pack has a bunch of resources that you can use to prepare for Lightning Experience. And one of the resources is a Lightning Experience checklist that you can use to see that you've covered everything for the manual analysis. You should also, the readiness check has a very high-level view on the impact of on App Exchange apps, but you should try and run those App Exchange apps in Lightning UI and see if they actually work. Most of the apps are now Lightning, or if they're not Lightning ready, they are on their way to be Lightning ready, so it shouldn't be a big problem. But if there is an app that you definitely need and doesn't work, then you need to plan around that. Finally, review the Lightning Experience Roadmap. You can find it in Help and Training section. This roadmap will tell you what features are available when, and again, help you create that project plan. Although it's possible to migrate your existing business processes that work very well in Classic UI to Lightning UI as is, the migration project is a great opportunity to revisit some of these business processes and understand how they can be done better in Lightning UI. Lightning Experience is more than just a new UI. It's a new way of managing a business and accessing data. So some of the processes, you might want to tweak them or change them so that they exploit the enhanced functionality provided by Lightning. So here are some tips. You can ask the users directly. You can show them what works in Lightning UI and ask them what they would like to change. You should select some super users, SMEs, especially from your sales and service teams, and do a walkthrough of the new UI and ask them if they'd like to do something different in Lightning UI. And finally, work with the exec sponsor to drive the right kind of behaviors top-down. So all of this will probably enable you to deliver a process that's optimized for Lightning Experience. The third and final step in Discover is Align. The purpose of Align is to get a exec sign-off and get to a decision point of yes or no. So to that end, you'll have to present a summary of your findings from the evaluate phase to your steering committee and to your execs. My recommendation is that you shouldn't sugarcoat the facts. You should highlight the challenges and efforts involved in migrating to Lightning. Again, there's an excellent resource that Salesforce has provided that will help you prepare this presentation. And depending on the size of your organization, if it's a large enterprise organization, you will have to do this again and again for different stakeholders to get their buy-in. So I wouldn't underestimate the effort involved in doing this. You may have to provide a high-level cost estimate and then justify the cost by explaining or demonstrating the ROI. Finally, you would need to have a plan to ensure business continuity. Unless your org is a very small professional edition org with just 10 users, all of the migration projects that I've seen for medium to large orgs, they usually end up being on a time scale of a month to 12 months. So you need to ensure that the business as usual will work during that transition period. Okay, so after assuming you've done all of this and presented to the stakeholders, you will get to a decision point of yes or no. But let's say you did get a yes, and you move to the next phase, which is rollout, where you do the planning and build. The first step in rollout is plan. So you start by developing a strategy. You can use the readiness report that you've generated in the evaluate phase and use that as a base and build from there. Now, in my experience, there are two general approaches for migration, for any migration project, but it applies here more so. And this is the big bang approach. Depending on the size of your org and complexity of your org, a big bang approach might be a favorite approach. So in this approach, you take all of the customization, custom apps, and all of your users to move them all to Lightning in one go. It works well for small orgs. It's potentially high impact approach which requires a massive effort, and it will be distributed to your users' workflow. It's always easy to break down a complex task into smaller tasks and then implement them. And to that end, you should consider phased approach. Most of the organizations that I've worked with, they've been adding they have tons of customizations to their org. They've been using Salesforce for a while. In some cases, they have multiple orgs. So for those orgs and setup, I would recommend the phased approach. So it's ideal for large and complex orgs. There are two ways of doing phased approach. You could either move a business unit to Lightning one at a time. So for example, you could move your sales team to Lightning or your service team to Lightning, or you could group all of the functionality into a logical group and move that logical group to Lightning one at a time. So it really depends on how your org structured and your internal business processes and what impact it will have on business as usual. One of the downsides of doing a phased approach is some users, especially whose functions overlap multiple business units, may have to use both UIs at the same time. So they will end up using or switching between Classic and Lightning. If it's acceptable to the business, then you should definitely consider phased. And you will end up with some technical debt. By that, I mean that you will probably have to maintain similar features in both Classic and Lightning. My view is that technical debt in itself is not a bad thing, as long as you track it and manage it and have a plan to address it at some point. So that's phased approach is definitely better than a big bang approach because it's safer and less disruptive for users. Okay, so here are a few other things that you might want to do. The first thing is probably a bit controversial. So, well, assembling your team. You should obviously, once you've identified the phases, you should assemble your team. Now, Lightning Experience, as you might know, is built on top of Lightning Components framework, which is primarily a JavaScript framework. It's more sophisticated, more complex than Visualforce. If you were a Visualforce developer, you could get by knowing a little bit of JavaScript. I've been guilty of this. I usually just Google something, copy paste, and if it doesn't work, then fix it. No, I don't do that, but So with Visualforce, you could get away by not knowing JavaScript in depth. But with Lightning, it's primarily a client-side framework as opposed to a server-side framework like Visualforce. So even a simple Lightning component will require you to write a lot of JavaScript code. Now, however many years ago when Apex was introduced, a lot of consultancies or users, companies hired Java developers because Apex was similar to Java. Similarly, because now you will be writing a lot of Lightning apps, Lightning components, I'd recommend you hire JavaScript developers. Another benefit of hiring JavaScript devs right now is they're cheaper than Apex and Visualforce devs. Definitely. Again, identify your pilot group of users. Make sure these users are more engaged than the normal users and give you valuable feedback. Yeah, same. Then create a dedicated group, whether that's a chatter group, that's fine. Whether it's a chatter group or it's a Slack group or Skype. Create a dedicated group where you can manage and curate discussion around Lightning. How do you know that your migration is successful? Identify those measures of success. So it could be, you want to achieve 10% more lead conversion, 5% more happiness, whatever that metric is. Whether you want to see that employees are spending more time in Salesforce now because they like Lightning UI, whatever those measures are, identify them. To refine those measures, conduct a survey or poll about what's important to users. So I think that the survey or poll is an underutilized tool, and we should be using that more to get feedback or ask the users directly what's important to them. If you want to improve adoption, you need to have a robust comms strategy. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but make sure you have a comms strategy, or at least thinking about that. And finally, create a project plan that is a target end date, a test plan, and deployment strategy. Now, some of this might seem obvious to most of you, but I've realized working with projects is even if people know what they should be doing, they don't necessarily act on that insight. Okay, so a few tips on this build and test. So again, with Lightning, because it's a Lightning Components framework, you won't be building individual pages. You'll be building single page apps, which are different from, I guess, Visualforce. So a single page app is a web app where you have a single page, and the users interact with it, and the data and content on that page changes dynamically based on the user interaction. Second tip is, in the migration project, you need to ensure that the data model is not affected. Ideally, it shouldn't change at all, but unless you're changing some core business processes, try and keep the data model changes to a minimum. Even though you can make Visualforce work in Lightning by making a few modifications, my recommendation would be that you try and transform Visualforce pages into Lightning components. The new dashboard engine and dashboard UI is amazing. So I would say that you need to rewrite all of your current dashboard reports and dashboards using the new Lightning dashboard. Finally, you won't be, if you're working in a large organization, you won't be doing this in isolation. So there might be other projects that are running in parallel. So make sure you align your build with the broader CRM roadmap. Test plan should be comprehensive, and you shouldn't just cover the existing business functionality, but all of the new functionality provided by Lightning. Use a full copy sandbox where possible with live-like data. You'd be amazed at the kind of bugs you'll find once you test on live-like data. Oops, sorry. Go back. Engage key stakeholders and capture feedback. Again, during testing phase, identify some key stakeholders, show them what you're planning to build and deploy, and get their feedback. And distinguish between bugs and new feature requests. Again, that's, bugs, you should fix them immediately, and the new feature request might increase your scope, so make sure you just prioritize and add it to the backlog and try not to implement everything. Okay, so like I said, good comms and training strategies. So there was a talk before mine about Louise around training and why it's important. You should check that out on YouTube if you haven't seen it. Comms and training are important if you want to improve adoption. The users need to know, need to be made aware of what's coming, and they need to be trained appropriately. If you don't do that, one of the things that I've noticed is people go to we move users to Lightning, they're lost, they can't figure out something, how to make it work. They'll immediately go to that switch to classic option and go back to classic, which kind of defeats the purpose. So make sure you have a good training comms strategy. Obviously, for training, you should leverage Trailhead to train your users. For users who are too busy doing their day job, who don't have time to go through the Trailhead modules, set up lunch and learn sessions for them, and communicate all of these changes either through chatter or internal newsletter. And after you've done all of that, build, test, comms, it's time to go live, your launch. But are we done? Nope. We still have to optimize. The journey doesn't end here. After you launch, you should optimize. You could argue that this applies again to all software projects, but it applies here more so. You measure the impact and effectiveness of your rollout and demonstrate the ROI for the migration project. So what things do you measure? So you want to create adoption reports and dashboards. Again, you don't have to do this manually. There's a great app called Lightning Adoption Tracker that's available on the App Exchange that you can download, and it has a lot of useful reports and dashboards that you can use to track user adoption. Again, reiterating that conduct user surveys to gather feedback, set up regular meetings, especially with your super users and SMEs, and ask them what can be changed or done better. And finally, the whole purpose of optimize and measure is to report this out back to the exec sponsors to demonstrate the productivity gain, effectiveness, and impact of Lightning. Migration to Lightning may sound daunting initially, especially for large organizations. Successful migration strategy is based on cultural and business considerations, not on technology. From my limited experience in migration, the biggest hurdle is not the actual process or technology. It's the awareness or the knowledge about what the new UI has to offer. Once you go past that hurdle, the rest will follow. So hopefully, I've convinced you to not worry about Lightning and love the Lightning experience. Thank you. Do we have time for Q&A? There's nobody here. I think we do. Any questions? Yeah.
So in my organisation, the Salesforce team is sitting in this chair. Do you think it's possible for one person to take on a Lightning migration project? I've got a business working group, which is effectively your exec sponsorship, but the actual practical, tangible measures of doing the work and make sure everything works. Do you think that's a one-man job, or do you think we need to hire them?
So the question, I'm just repeating the question for the video. The question is, can one person, well, it depends. Sorry, the question is, can one person do the migration on his own? Yeah? The answer is it depends. If it's a simple implementation and you don't have a lot of complex things that you need to migrate. The complexity would come around, not around business process and data model, that might stay the same mostly. But if you have a ton of Visualforce pages that do complex logic, or if you have new processes because it needs to work better in Lightning, then probably you need more people than just one person. Yeah. Plus, you need to think about training and all of the other stuff. So you need all of the support group around that. Any more questions? Okay, cool. Thank you.